toddler hasn't eaten a full meal in 72 hours. Not for his mother, not for the team of pediatric nutritionists, and certainly not for his grandfather, the billionaire who ordered the one person who could feed him to leave. Now, with his grandson losing weight and his empire powerless to fix it, the most powerful man in Seoul must make the one call that humiliates him, asking the nanny he fired to come back. Her name is Amani. For 8 months, she was more than a nanny to little Kim Min-jun. She was his safe harbor, until a single misunderstanding, a clash of culture and pride, led her to be dismissed without notice. This is the story of how a toddler's silent protest exposed a truth every parent knows, but this tycoon forgot. Love, not power, is the most essential ingredient. But how did a bond so strong form in the first place, in a home built on control? Amani Okoro arrived at the Kim residence on a rainy April morning, her entire life contained in 2 suitcases and a folded copy of her nanny certification from Lagos. The house was not a home, it was a monument. A 40-room Hanok-inspired estate in Seongbuk-dong, built by Chairman Kim Seung-hwan over 5 decades to signify his arrival and then his dominance in the world of semiconductor manufacturing. Every stone was placed with intention. Every silence was managed. The staff moved through the hallways like whispers, and at the center of it all was the chairman's greatest pride and his most perplexing project, his 3-year-old grandson, Min-jun. The boy's mother, Soo-jin, was a former concert pianist whose career had been gracefully absorbed into the role of corporate wife. She was elegant, anxious, and perpetually exhausted by the scrutiny of her father-in-law. Min-jun was a quiet child with a thoughtful gaze that seemed to absorb the tension in the rooms he occupied. He had a history of selective eating that predated Amani's arrival, a common phase, the pediatrician said. But in the house of Kim, common problems were viewed as strategic failures. A succession of nannies, each more highly credentialed than the last, had tried and failed to expand his diet beyond plain rice, yogurt, and banana. Each dismissal was quiet, a severance package and a signed NDA. The problem was not the child, the chairman had decided. It was the quality of the help. Amani was the 7th candidate to interview that month. She was 29, with a degree in early childhood development from the University of Lagos and 5 years of experience with diplomatic families in Abuja. What the agency file didn't show was the reason she left Nigeria: to escape the weight of her own grief after losing her mother, a vibrant market trader who could make a feast from nothing and whose laugh could fill a city block. Amani carried that absence in her hands, hands that her mother always said were meant to hold and to heal. The interview was not with Soo-jin, but with Chairman Kim himself in his study overlooking the koi pond. He did not ask about her methods. He presented a scenario. The child refuses the food. He cries, "What is your procedure?" Amani met his gaze. "I would first ask if he is feeling well. Then I would sit with him, not to force, but to model. Children do not learn to trust food from instructions. They learn from shared joy. My mother taught me that the first ingredient in any meal is patience." The chairman said nothing for a full minute, his fingers steepled. He was a man who built empires on precision and pressure. Patience was a variable he could not control. He hired her on a 6-month trial. The bond did not form overnight. For the first week, Min-jun simply watched her. Amani did not push. She sat on the floor of his playroom and built block towers, letting them fall with dramatic gasps that finally, on the 3rd day, elicited a faint smile. She learned his rhythms. He was sensitive to loud noises, so she hummed. He disliked the feel of certain fabrics, so she learned which sweaters he would tolerate. She reported none of this to the chairman. These were not data points for a boardroom. They were the secret language of care. The breakthrough came in the kitchen. It was a Tuesday. The house chef had prepared a beautiful, nutritionally balanced bento box. Min-jun took one look and pushed it away, his lip trembling. Amani, remembering her mother's kitchen, had an idea. She asked the chef for permission to use a corner of the massive kitchen. She took a single sweet potato, roasted it until the skin charred, then scooped the flesh into a bowl. She added a tiny pinch of salt, a drizzle of honey, and mashed it slowly, the rhythm deliberate and calm. She did not bring it to the high chair. Instead, she sat at the sun-drenched kitchen table, put a small spoonful in her own mouth, and closed her eyes. "Ah," she said, a sound of pure, uncomplicated pleasure. Minjun, from his high chair, stopped fussing. He watched. Amani took another spoonful, humming. She did not look at him. After a long moment, he made a small, inquisitive sound. She turned, smiled, and held out a clean spoon with a tiny dollop of the orange mash. He leaned forward and took it. He swallowed. He did not smile, but he opened his mouth for another. That sweet potato mash became their ritual. From there, Amani built an entire world of flavor, one tiny victory at a time. She made asterisk jollof rice with mild peppers, and he ate the peas first, then the grains. She made asterisk moin moin asterisk steamed bean cakes, and he delighted in unwrapping the banana leaves. She called them our secret adventures, and in the sanctuary of the nursery, Minjun began to bloom. He babbled more. He reached for her hand. He slept through the night. Sujin noticed the change with tearful gratitude. The chairman noticed the metrics: weight gain, improved sleep reports, no more pediatrician calls. He approved a raise and a private health insurance package. He saw Amani not as a miracle worker, but as a supremely efficient solution, a high-performing asset. And that was the first crack in the foundation. Because Amani was not an asset, she was a woman who had given her heart to a child who was not her own. She saw the loneliness in Sujin's eyes and began leaving a small plate of whatever she'd made for Minjun on the piano for her. She saw the way the household staff jumped at the chairman's shadow, and she made a point of thanking the chef by name every day. She was building a web of human connection in a place designed to function without it. The chairman observed this too, the easy laughter from the nursery that drifted into the hall, the way his head housekeeper, Mrs. Park, had begun to soften toward her, the way his grandson now cried, not at bedtime, but when Amani's shift ended. The child's attachment was becoming a dependency, and in Chairman Kim's worldview, dependency was a vulnerability, a strategic risk. The incident that ended it all was, in hindsight, a small thing. It was during the annual board retreat at the estate. The chairman was hosting his most important international partners in the garden. Minjun, overwhelmed by the crowd, had a meltdown. Amani, who was off duty but heard his cries from her quarters, rushed to the garden. She didn't see the chairman presenting to the Japanese delegation. She saw a terrified little boy. She swept him up into her arms, turned her back to the crowd, and began to sing softly into his ear, a Yoruba lullaby her mother used to sing. Within a minute, his sobs subsided into hiccups. The garden was silent. Later, in his study, the chairman was icy. "You undermined me in front of my partners." He was scared, Amani said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. He needed comfort. "His need," the chairman said, "is to learn composure. You have confused kindness with coddling. You have made him soft." The argument that followed was not loud, but it was fatal. Amani spoke of emotional security. The chairman spoke of discipline and legacy. He saw a nanny overstepping. She saw a man who viewed his grandson's heart as a circuit board to be debugged. "You cannot program a child to love you," she said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. The next morning, a termination letter and a severance check were delivered to her room. Mrs. Park stood stiffly at the door, her eyes downcast. The reason listed: breach of professional protocol and insubordination. She was given 2 hours to pack. She was not allowed to say goodbye to Minjun. From the nursery window, Sujin watched Amani's taxi disappear down the hill, her own hand pressed over her mouth to silence a sob. Behind her, Minjun sat on the floor, holding the wooden spoon from their sweet potato ritual. He did not cry. He just stared at the closed door. The first meal without her was lunch. The chef prepared the favorite bento. Minjun looked at it, looked at his mother, and firmly closed his mouth. He did not throw a tantrum. He simply refused. Dinner was the same. The next day, he accepted only sips of water. By the end of the third day, the pediatrician was in the room, warning of the risks of dehydration. The chairman's solution, to hire a new, more disciplined nanny, only made the boy shrink further into silence. The high chair at the massive dining table became a battleground where the most powerful man in the room was being defeated by a 3-year-old's broken heart. And in a small studio apartment in Itaewon, Amani stared at her phone, willing it to ring, unaware that the bond she had built was now the only thing that could save the child she loved. In the Kim estate, the silence from the nursery was louder than any scream. Minjun's hunger strike as the stern pediatrician now termed it, entered its first week. He existed on a brutal cycle of forced sips of electrolyte solution and fleeting moments of exhausted sleep. His cheeks, once rounded from Amani's sweet potatoes, grew hollow. He stopped reaching for toys. He simply sat in his mother's lap, a listless weight, his eyes fixed on the door. Sujin became a ghost in her own home. She moved through the halls clutching her son, her pianist's hands now trembling with a fear no sonata could express. She pleaded with the succession of new nannies, a stern Swiss woman with a degree in child nutrition, a gentle Filipina caregiver with impeccable references. Minjun rejected them all with a turn of his head. The chairman's response was to increase the pressure. He brought in a child psychologist who spoke of oppositional defiance. He had the chef prepare 12 elaborate, colorful small plates, a culinary parade designed to entice. The boy just stared, his gaze empty. The chairman refused to see the cause. To him, it was a logistical problem, a faulty component. He is a Kim, he declared to his son, Minjun's father, Yi-won, who had flown in from the Singapore office. He will learn resilience, he must eat. But the child's body was beginning to teach a different, more terrifying lesson. Resilience requires a foundation of safety, and his had been ripped away. Meanwhile, in Itaewon, Amani's world had shrunk to the four walls of a Gashiwan room, barely larger than the Kim's walk-in closet. Her severance pay was frozen due to a bureaucratic dispute over her visa status, triggered by the abrupt termination. The elegant nanny who had navigated the halls of a billion-won home was now lining up at a community center for a free meal, her diploma and certifications meaningless without a sponsor. She spent her days applying for jobs that never called back, and her nights staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of Minjun's small hand in hers. She had one lifeline, Chloe, a fellow Nigerian expat and nursing student who let her sleep on her couch after the Gashiwan money ran out. "You have to let him go, Dalian *," Chloe said one night, handing her a cup of strong tea. "That family used you and threw you away. Your heart is too big for this." Amani shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "It's not about them, it's about him. He doesn't understand why I left. He thinks I abandoned him. In his world, I just disappeared." Back at the estate, the crisis reached a breaking point. On the 8th day, Minjun became too weak to sit up. An ambulance was called, not to the public hospital, but to the private wing of Seoul National University Hospital, where the Kim family had an entire floor on discreet retainer. The diagnosis was acute dehydration and failure to thrive, exacerbated by severe emotional distress. The lead pediatrician, an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, looked from the frail child to the powerful grandfather and delivered a verdict that was not medical, but moral. "Chairman Kim, you can hook him up to every IV in this hospital. You can force-feed him through a nasogastric tube. You will put calories into his body, but you will not fix what is broken. His spirit is in shutdown. He is grieving." "Grieving," the chairman scoffed, though his face was pale. "He is 3, he does not grieve." The loss of a primary caregiver is the single most traumatic event in a young child's life, the doctor said, her voice quiet but firm. "His body is manifesting what his mind cannot process. You are treating a symptom. You need to address the cause." In that sterile hospital room, under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, the chairman's worldview faced its first true quake. His money could not fix this. His authority could not command it. For the first time in 50 years, Kim Seung-hwan was presented with a problem that could not be solved by a deal, a merger, or a firing. It had to be solved by a surrender. That night in the family suite, Sujin finally broke. She turned on her father-in-law, her voice a raw whisper. "You did this. You saw the love in that room and you called it a weakness. You saw her healing him and you called it insubordination. Now look at your legacy." She gestured to the hospital bed where Minjun slept, a tube taped to his nose. "Is this strong enough for you?" The chairman left the room without a word. He did not go to his office. He walked the empty hospital corridors, the sound of his leather soles echoing like a heartbeat. He passed rooms where ordinary families huddled around sick children, their faces etched with a fear he now recognized. He had built a fortune on predicting demand, on controlling supply chains that span the globe. Yet he had failed to comprehend the most basic supply chain of all, a child's need for love, and the one woman who had been its sole provider. Pride was the bedrock of his life. To call Armani would be to shatter it, to admit that the help knew his grandson better than he did, that the African nanny he'd dismissed held the key to his family's future. It was an impossible humiliation. But in the dark, silent hours before dawn, he stood outside Minjun's room and watched through the glass. The boy stirred in his sleep, his small hand twitching, and a single breathless word escaped his lips. Manny asterisk. It was not grandfather. It was not mother. It was a fractured version of the name he could no longer say properly. That tiny, unconscious sound was the sledgehammer. The chairman's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, leaving only the cold, stark reality, his pride or his grandson's life. He instructed his assistant to find her. It took 6 hours. There was no phone number. The agency had washed their hands of her. The assistant finally tracked a payment to the Gashiwan, only to find she had moved out. It was Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper, who remembered Armani mentioning her friend Chloe, a nursing student at Yonsei. A discreet inquiry through the university's International Student Office provided a number. The call came as Armani was helping Chloe sort medical supplies at a free clinic in a basement church. Her phone vibrated with an unknown number. She answered, her voice cautious. Miss Okoro. It was Chairman Kim's voice, but stripped of its command. It sounded old and tired. It is Kim Seung-Hwan. Armani's blood went cold. She stepped into the chilly alley behind the clinic. Chairman. A long pause. She could hear him breathing. Minjun is in the hospital. The world tilted. She leaned against the brick wall. What's wrong? He has not eaten, not since you left. He will not. Another pause, heavier. The doctors say it is emotional. They say he is grieving. The word coming from him was a shocking admission. Armani closed her eyes, the pain a physical ache. What do you want me to do? The silence on the line stretched. She could almost hear the battle raging within him, the crumbling of a lifetime of certainty. When he spoke again, the words seemed dragged from a deep, dark place. I am asking you to come back, to help him. Asking, not ordering, asking. A flood of emotions, vindication, fury, overwhelming concern for Minjun crashed over her. You fired me. You said I made him weak. I was wrong. The admission was blunt, almost brutal. In this matter, I was wrong. Will you come? But Armani had learned. The woman who had arrived with 2 suitcases was gone. In her place was someone who understood the value of her own heart. On what terms, Chairman? Your old position, double the salary, a revised contract. No, she said, the word clear in the cold air. Not those terms. I will not be an employee you can dismiss again when he's better. I will come as a consultant. For Minjun, I set the schedule. I set the methods. You and everyone in that house follow my lead, and you will sign a guarantee for my visa independent of my employment with you. It was an unimaginable power reversal. From the alley in Itaewon, she was dictating terms to one of the most powerful men in Seoul. The silence on the line was absolute. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, a single word, agreed. I want it in writing, emailed to me before I get in a taxi. Agreed. I will be there in 1 hour. The reunion was not in the grand hall, but in the sterile hospital suite. Armani walked in, her simple dress a stark contrast to the medical equipment. She ignored the chairman, who stood rigidly by the window. She went straight to Soo Jin, who crumpled in relief. Then she approached the bed. Minjun's eyes were half open, dull with fatigue. When they focused on her, there was no immediate joy, just a slow, deep recognition. Armani's eyes filled. She did not touch him immediately. She simply sat in the chair beside his bed, placed her bag on the floor, and began to hum. It was the same Yoruba lullaby from the garden. His tiny finger moved, hooking around the edge of her sleeve. A single tear tracked from the corner of his eye into his hairline. Very slowly, Armani reached out and wiped it away with her thumb. I'm here, asterisk letawani CDK letawani B9 my asterisk, she whispered. My brave one, I'm here. She worked not with food but with trust. She asked for the nasogastric tube to be removed. The doctors protested, but she was immovable. "You cannot build a bridge to his heart through his nose," she said quietly. She asked for a single plain sweet potato to be baked. She sat by his bed, eating a small bite herself, offering none. She talked softly about the silly shapes in the ceiling tiles. She read a familiar book. It took 4 hours. Then, with the sunlight fading, Minjun turned his head and opened his mouth, like a baby bird. Amani fed him a tiny spoonful of the sweet potato. He swallowed. He took another. It was not a miracle cure. It was the first fragile stitch in a torn fabric. But in that moment, Sujin wept silently into her hands. The chairman, watching from the corner, saw not a nanny feeding a child, but a lifeline being thrown across a chasm he had created. He saw the absolute, unearned forgiveness in Amani's posture, the total focus on his grandson, and he felt a shame so profound it was a taste in his mouth. Amani moved back into the estate that night, but nothing was the same. Her old room had been prepared, but it felt like a museum of a past life. The staff treated her with a new, cautious reverence. She was no longer the help. She was the specialist, the one who had been recalled from exile to salvage the crown prince. She established new rules. No more forced mealtimes in the grand dining room. Meals would be on the floor of the sunroom on a mat with her. No more parade of new nannies. For now, it would be just her and Sujin. And the chairman was not to observe during feeding times. His presence, she explained with a diplomat's grace, but a surgeon's precision, was associated with pressure and loss. He was to be a grandfather, not a supervisor. He accepted these terms, each one a pill to swallow, but the real test was yet to come, because Amani's return had fixed the immediate crisis, but it had unleashed a deeper one. The family's dysfunction was now exposed, raw and throbbing. Sujin looked at her father-in-law with barely veiled resentment. Yiwon, the son, was furious at the damage done in his absence. And Amani, the outsider, now held the moral authority in the home. The chairman found himself a ghost in his own palace, packing the periphery of a healing he had almost destroyed. He watched from doorways as Amani and Minjun rebuilt their world, a world from which he was politely, firmly excluded. The bitterness of his mistake warred with the dawning, uncomfortable realization. To be let back in, he would have to change. And for a man of 74, change felt like death. But the storm was not over. A maid's phone, left unattended, had captured a snippet of video in the hospital corridor. The mighty Chairman Kim head bowed, listening as Amani spoke firmly to him. It was an ambiguous clip, but in the hands of a junior staff member nursing a grievance over unpaid overtime, it was a weapon. The clip was sent to a gossip outlet. The headline, published the next morning, was designed to provoke KIM Empire in Crisis. Grand Heir's health fails. African nanny recalled in secret hospital drama. The private shame was about to become a public scandal. And as the chairman's phone began to ring with calls from concerned board members and snickering rivals, he realized that the battle for his grandson's health was over. A new war for his family's reputation and his own crumbling authority had just begun. The gossip item was a spark in a room full of gas. Within hours, the story mutated. It was no longer just about a sick child. It was framed as a palace intrigue. Kim dynasty rocked by Nanny Gate. Toddler's health crisis exposes family rift. Comment sections filled with speculation, much of it ugly. Some blamed Amani, calling her a manipulative gold digger. Others mocked the chairman's impotence. The board of Kim's Semiconductors, a group of old men for whom image was currency, demanded an emergency meeting. Chairman Kim's first instinct was to crush it, to deploy his legal team, issue denials, and sue the outlet into oblivion. But Yiwon, his son, stopped him. "You sue, and you make it the story for the next 6 months. Every court filing, every headline. Is that what Minjun needs? Is that what the stock price needs?" For the first time, Yiwon was not the obedient heir. He was the acting CEO protecting his company from his father's pride. The chairman was sidelined in his own crisis. The storm moved indoors. Reporters camped at the estate gates. Drone cameras buzzed overhead, trying to capture a glimpse of the mysterious nanny or the frail heir. The home became a fortress under siege, and the tension seeped into every room. Minjun, sensitive to atmosphere, regressed. He clung to Amani, refusing to let her leave his sight, even to use the bathroom. The hard-won progress on eating stalled. He would only take a few bites before burying his face in her neck. Amani was trapped in a gilded cage. She couldn't leave. Her face was now semi-public. Chloe called her, voice tight with worry. Amani, people are digging. They're on expat forums asking about you. This is not safe. The chairman's promised visa guarantee was lost in the chaos, a verbal agreement in a hurricane of lawyers. Her legal status was once again a cliff's edge. Then came the letter. It arrived not for the chairman, but for Amani, marked private and confidential from the Seoul Family Welfare Bureau. It was a notice of a preliminary inquiry. An anonymous tip had been filed, alleging potential emotional manipulation and coercive care practices of a minor under her supervision. The subtext was clear. She was being accused of causing Min-jun's dependency, of being the problem, not the solution. Soo-jin was apoplectic. This is Sarah's work, she hissed to Amani, using the Korean term for the chairman's longtime, fiercely loyal executive assistant, Mrs. Han. Mrs. Han had never approved of Amani, viewing her as an unpredictable variable. Amani felt the walls closing in. A government inquiry could freeze her visa application permanently, regardless of the chairman's guarantee. It was a professional death sentence. But the attack revealed a fatal flaw in the opposition's strategy. They underestimated the loyalty Amani had built below stairs. The housekeeper, Mrs. Park, who had once been so cold, now saw her home and the child she'd helped raise under attack from outsiders and from within. She requested a private audience with the chairman. In his study, she placed her resignation letter on his desk. "I have served this family for 30 years, she said, her voice steady. "I have kept every secret, but I will not be part of a campaign to destroy the one person who saved your grandson. Miss Okoro's only crime was caring more for that boy than anyone in this house, including you. Mrs. Han made me notarize a false statement about the hospital incident. I will not lie for her or for you anymore." The chairman was stunned. Mrs. Han filed the report. "To protect you," she said, "to remove the distraction." The word distraction hung in the air. Amani, a human being, was a distraction. Min-jun's heart, a logistical problem. The chairman finally saw the toxic machinery of his own world, a machine operated by people like Mrs. Han who believed they were serving him by eliminating any source of discomfort, any challenge to control. He had built this system, and now it was trying to eat his grandson's lifeline. He dismissed Mrs. Han that evening. It was not a quiet retirement. It was a furious, scorched-earth termination that sent shockwaves through his corporate office. But the welfare inquiry was already in motion, a bureaucratic boulder rolling downhill. Amani knew she had to act. She couldn't fight this with lawyers or silence. She needed to change the story. She asked for a meeting with the chairman and Yi-won. In the same study where she was first interviewed, she laid out a radical proposal. "The narrative is that this is a scandal, a secret, a failure. We need to change it to something else, a story of recovery, of a community." Yi-won was skeptical. "You want to do a press conference? That's insanity." "No," Amani said, "I want to open the gates." The chairman stared at her, as if she'd suggested burning the house down. "Not to the gossip reporters," she continued, "to one reputable outlet, a documentary team or a serious family health journalist. We give them controlled access. We show Min-jun's recovery not as a Kim family secret, but as a case study in child psychology and cross-cultural care. We show the work. We take the shame out of it and replace it with understanding." It was a breathtaking gamble, to trade privacy for transparency, to weaponize vulnerability. Yi-won, the strategist, saw the potential first. "We frame it before our rivals can. We control the message. Kim family champions innovative child wellness approach. It turns a weakness into a strength." The chairman was revolted. "You want to put my grandson on display like a zoo animal." "He is already on display." Amani's composure cracked for the first time. "They are writing stories about him with no facts. They are painting him as a pathetic little pawn. This lets us show who he really is, a brave, smart little boy overcoming a hard thing, with his family's support. Isn't that the legacy you want? Not one of hiding and shame, but one of facing trouble with grace." The word grace did it. It was a quality never associated with Kim Seung-hwan. Ruthless, yes, brilliant, sure, but never graceful. He saw in a flash two futures, one where this scandal defined his final years, and one where he could, impossibly, be remembered for something softer. He gave a single, stiff nod. The project, dubbed the Sunshine Protocol internally, began. A respected documentary filmmaker, known for sensitive human stories, was granted unprecedented access. Cameras were installed in the sunroom and playroom. Amani, with Minjun's gradual assent, began to allow filming during their sessions. She explained everything to the boy in simple terms. "These friends are helping us tell our happy story." He called them the quiet friends. The footage was raw and powerful. It showed Amani patience, not as passivity, but as active, loving presence. It showed Minjun's incremental victories, trying a blueberry, stacking a block, laughing at a silly face. It showed Sujin, not as a passive society wife, but as a mother learning to trust her own instincts again beside Amani. It showed the chairman, awkwardly at first, being taught by Amani how to sit on the floor and play, how to offer food without pressure. His first successful interaction, handing Minjun a peeled grape and receiving a tiny, hesitant smile, was a moment of television gold. But just as the new narrative began to take shape, the old one struck back. The Welfare Bureau inquiry culminated in a surprise visit. Two officials arrived at the estate. They asked to observe Amani alone with the child. The cameras, meant for the documentary, now served a different purpose. They were her witnesses. The observation was an hour of intense, silent scrutiny. Amani went through their routine, her heart pounding but her hands steady. She helped Minjun water a plant, read a book, and then at snack time she presented two bowls, one with apple slices, one with a new food, soft tofu with a drizzle of honey. She took a bite of the tofu herself, made a happy sound, and placed both bowls between them. Minjun looked at the tofu, then at her. He picked up an apple slice. The officials made a note. Then, after eating his apple, he pointed at the tofu. Amani spooned a tiny bit. He tasted it, made a thoughtful face, and swallowed. He did not ask for more, but he had tried it. It was a textbook example of responsive, pressure-free feeding. One of the officials, a younger woman, almost smiled. The lead investigator remained stern. As they were leaving, he turned to Amani. "Your methods are unorthodox, but the child is clearly attached to you in a secure way. He is improving." The inquiry was closed with a recommendation for no action. Victory, but it was a Pyrrhic one. The very next day, a new story broke. This time, it wasn't in a gossip rag, but in a major financial newspaper. The headline was a precision missile, Kim's semiconductor governance questioned as chairman focuses on family drama. The article quoted unnamed board members concerned about succession planning and leadership focus. It subtly tied the company's recent stock dip to the ongoing domestic distractions. It was a corporate coup in print. The real battle, it turned out, was never about a nanny or a toddler. It was about control of a $90 billion empire. Yi-Wan confronted his father. "They are using this to force you out, to make me the full chairman now. They think you've gone soft, that you're a liability." The old man's eyes were flint. The humiliation, the effort, the tiny steps toward grace, all of it was being used as evidence of his decline. He saw the end of his life's work being orchestrated by men he had made rich. And in that moment, Kim Seung-hwan faced his ultimate choice: cling to the throne and fight his own son and board, likely destroying the company in a civil war, or surrender. He looked out the window to the sunroom, where the documentary camera was quietly filming. Amani was on the floor, helping Minjun pour rice from one cup to another. The boy was concentrating, his tongue poking out. Sujin sat beside them, her face peaceful. It was a scene of ordinary, precious healing, the very thing his rivals were mocking. He made his decision. He called the documentary filmmaker. "I want to add an interview," he said, "with me today." That evening in his study under the camera's lens, the chairman did not give a corporate statement. He told a story. He spoke of his own childhood, of a father who measured love in achievements and silence. He spoke of his fear that his own son, Yi-Wan, had grown up in the same emotional winter. He admitted on camera to firing Amani out of fear, fear of her influence, fear of his own irrelevance, fear of a love he didn't know how to control. He called it the greatest mistake of his life. Then he looked directly into the lens, his voice gravelly with emotion. "My grandson is teaching me that strength is not in never needing help. It is in having the courage to accept it. If that makes me unfit to run a company in the eyes of some, so be it." There are many who can run Kim's Semiconductor. There is only one person who is my grandson's Armani. My priority is clear. He was not just defending Armani, he was announcing his abdication. The board's weapon, the narrative of his weakness, he had just embraced and redefined as his humanity. The war for the public story was over. He had won by surrendering. But as the cameras stopped rolling, a new and more terrifying question emerged. In the wake of this nuclear transparency, with the old king stepping down, what would become of the delicate, healing world they had built in the sunroom? And what would become of Armani, now permanently etched into the public story of the Kim family, when the documentary ended and the cameras went away? The chairman's interview did not air as a standalone segment. It became the emotional climax of the documentary, titled The Sunshine Protocol, A Family Healing. When it premiered on a major national network, the public reaction was not what the board had feared. It was a phenomenon. Ratings soared. The story of the Tycoon's humility and the nanny's unwavering care cut through the cynicism. Comment sections, once toxic, were now filled with personal stories of picky eaters, of grief, of generational healing. Armani was not labeled a gold digger, she was called an angel teacher. The chairman was not mocked as weak, he was celebrated as the grandfather who learned to love. The board's attempted coup collapsed under the weight of this overwhelming public goodwill. Kim's Semiconductor's stock, after a brief dip, rebounded and then climbed to a 2-year high. Analysts dubbed it the compassion bump, noting that the company's brand had transformed from cold efficiency to humane leadership. Yi-Won was confirmed as the new chairman in a smooth, celebratory transition. His first act was to create a family wellness fund in his son's name, focusing on childhood nutrition and caregiver support. Inside the estate, the change was quieter but more profound. With the external siege lifted, the real work of rebuilding could begin. Min-jun's recovery was not a straight line, but it was a firm upward trend. He began to eat regularly at a small table in the sunroom with Armani and his mother. New foods were introduced not as battles, but as adventures. Shall we try the green dragon today? For broccoli. He gained back the lost weight and then some. His laughter returned, not just silent giggles, but full-bodied squeals that echoed through the halls. The most significant shift, however, was in the family structure. Armani was no longer a consultant on the periphery. She became the sun around which the household orbited. Soo-jin, empowered by her role in the documentary, began to reclaim her life. She started teaching piano to Min-jun, with Armani as an enthusiastic, tone-deaf student. The two women became an unlikely partnership, a duet of care that extended beyond the child. Soo-jin helped Armani navigate permanent residency paperwork. Armani taught Soo-jin how to make jollof rice, a chaotic, joyful process that often left the kitchen smelling of Scotch bonnets for days. And the chairman, now simply Grandfather Seung-hwan, had to learn an entirely new way of being. His authority was gone. His opinions on feeding schedules were politely ignored. He was, for the first time since childhood, a student. Armani became his gentle, firm instructor in the language of connection. She gave him assignments. Today, sit with him for 15 minutes and just build blocks. Don't correct him, just build. The first few sessions were agonizing for the old man, his hands fumbling with the plastic bricks, his mind screaming that this was a waste of time. But he did it. And one afternoon, Min-jun, without looking up from his own construction, handed him a red block, a silent offering. The chairman took it, his throat tight. It was the first gift his grandson had ever given him that wasn't on a birthday or holiday. The documentary's success created an unexpected opportunity. A major publishing house approached Armani with a book deal, not a scandalous tell-all, but a practical, illustrated guide co-authored with a child psychologist, titled The Sunshine Table, Building Trust with Food Beyond Fear. It was a bestseller within a month, translating into a dozen languages. Armani used the advance to do two things. First, to secure a long-term visa as a person of exceptional ability in the field of child development. Second, to fund a small community kitchen in Itaewon, run by her friend Chloe, providing nutritious meals and feeding support to struggling immigrant families. Her role at the Kim estate evolved naturally. The formal title of Nanny was retired. She became Min-jun's guide and the family's wellness director. She had her own cottage on the grounds, a space that was hers alone. Her contract, now permanent, included a clause she insisted upon. Every Tuesday evening was hers, to have dinner with Chloe or to simply be alone. Her life was no longer consumed by the family, it was in balance with them. One such Tuesday evening, 6 months after the documentary aired, Amani returned to her cottage to find a package. It was plain, with no return address. Inside was a small, exquisitely carved wooden box. She opened it. Nestled on velvet was a pair of silver earrings, simple studs shaped like Adinkra symbols, the one for Jai Naim, except God, symbolizing the supremacy of faith. The other, Sankofa asterisk, go back and get it, symbolizing the importance of learning from the past. There was no note, but she knew. Only one person in that house knew the meaning of those symbols from their long-ago conversations about Chinua Achebe. She put them on and felt a weight settle, not of obligation, but of belonging. The following Saturday, grandfather Seung Hwan asked to see her in his study. The room was different now. The massive, intimidating desk had been replaced with a smaller table by the window. Photographs of Minjun and a few of the whole family, including Amani, were displayed openly. He was standing, looking out at the garden. The documentary filmmakers want to do a follow-up, he said without turning. 1 year later, they want to see the lasting change. Amani waited. What did you tell them? He turned. He looked older but softer. The permanent frown line between his brows seemed less deep. I told them I would ask you. It is your life they are filming too, Maury, than mine. This, more than anything, showed how far he had come. The man who once made unilateral decisions for everyone was asking for consent. I think, Amani said carefully, that it could be good to show that healing isn't a destination, it's a practice, but only if Minjun is comfortable and only if we control the edit. He nodded, agreed. He paused, then gestured to 2 chairs by the low table. Sit, please. They sat. A long, comfortable silence stretched between them, a thing that would have been impossible a year ago. I have been reading, he said finally, about attachment theory, Bowlby, Ainsworth. Amani couldn't hide her surprise. A faint, almost shy smile touched his lips. You said I treated my family like a balance sheet. I am trying to learn a new ledger. He struggled for the words. The book said that a secure base allows for exploration, that the child who is held tightly can then venture out boldly. Yes, Amani said, her voice soft. Minjun, he ventures now. He plays with other children at the park. He is bold. Because of you, you were his secure base when I failed to be. He looked down at his hands, then back at her, his gaze direct. I cannot change the past. I can only thank you for the present you have given him and for what you have taught me. It is the most difficult and most important lesson of my life. It was an apology, a thank you, and a tribute all in one. Amani simply nodded, accepting it. No more words were needed. The follow-up documentary, The Sunshine Protocol, 1 year on, was even more popular than the first. It showed Minjun, now a vibrant 4-year-old, helping Amani in the kitchen, chattering away in a mix of Korean and the English words she taught him. It showed grandfather Seung Hwan on the floor, pretending to be a dinosaur, roaring as Minjun shrieked with delight. It showed Sujin performing a small piano recital at a local hall, her son watching from the front row with Amani, both beaming with pride. The final scene was not planned. The filmmaker asked Amani, what does family mean to you now? Amani, sitting in the sunroom, thought for a long moment. Minjun was napping with his head in her lap. She stroked his hair. Family, she said slowly, is not who you are born to. It is who holds you. It is who shows up. It is the people who become your safe place to grow. I came here to do a job. I stayed to build a home. As she spoke, the camera panned gently to the window. Outside, grandfather Seung Hwan and Sujin were walking in the garden, deep in conversation. Then the old man stopped, pointed at a late-blooming rose, and called out something. Sujin laughed. It was a scene of ordinary, peaceful belonging. The film ended, but life continued. Amani's community kitchen thrived. Her book sparked a global conversation. And in the Kim estate, a new tradition was born. Every Tuesday, Amani still made jollof rice. But now, the table in the sunroom was set for 4. Grandfather Sung Chuan, who had once viewed the aromatic dish with suspicion, was now its most devoted fan, always asking for extra pepper. They would eat and talk, and sometimes argue about books or business or the best way to grow tomatoes. The high chair was gone. In its place was a sturdy booster seat for a little boy who was no longer afraid to eat, surrounded by the people who had finally learned how to feed him and each other with love. The toddler who refused to eat had not just been fed. He had taught a dynasty how to hunger for the right things, and in doing so, had nourished them all. The story of Amani and Minjun is often told as a fairy tale, the magical nanny who fixed the broken child. But that misses the point entirely. This wasn't magic, it was science. The science of attachment. The measurable, critical bond between a caregiver and a child that shapes neural pathways, regulates stress hormones, and quite literally builds the architecture of the brain. What looked like a simple feeding problem was, in fact, a catastrophic rupture in that essential bond. And what looked like a simple solution, bringing Amani back, was the only possible repair. We live in a world that undervalues care. We outsource it, we pay it poorly, we treat it as a transactional service. But the crisis in the Kim household, a crisis that halted a billion-dollar empire, proves a terrifying and beautiful truth. Care is the most critical infrastructure of all. Without it, everything else collapses. A toddler's refusal to eat was not disobedience. It was a biofeedback loop, his body reporting a system's failure in the environment meant to sustain him. Chairman Kim's journey is not a story about a tycoon going soft. It is a story about intelligence finally being applied to the right problem. He spent a lifetime optimizing supply chains, only to discover that the most fragile and important chain was the one connecting his grandson's heart to a source of safety. His real power wasn't in never being wrong. It was in his capacity, however painful, to finally recognize when he was. And Amani's story is not one of saintly sacrifice. It is one of professional expertise meeting profound human compassion. She didn't just offer love, she applied a deep understanding of developmental trauma. She was a mechanic for the human soul, using the tools of presence, patience, and culturally grounded joy to reassemble a shattered sense of security. She represents the millions of caregivers, mostly women, often immigrants, whose work is the invisible glue holding families, and by extension, societies, together. So what is the lingering question this story leaves us with? It's not whether love conquers all. It's whether we are brave enough to recognize the caregivers in our own lives, in our own systems, and give them the authority, respect, and support they deserve. It's whether we can build our homes, our companies, and our communities not just for efficiency, but for the kind of human connection that prevents these crises in the first place. Minjun is in kindergarten now. He's known as the boy who shares his snacks and tells long, elaborate stories. The high chair is stored away, but the wooden spoon from the first sweet potato is framed in Amani's cottage. A simple artifact of the day, a different future became possible. It is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is not a decree from a throne, but a quiet offering from a pair of strong, gentle hands that remembered what they were for. If you found this story of hidden connections and quiet courage meaningful, consider subscribing. We explore the unseen architectures of human relationships, the science behind the emotion, and the stories that remind us what truly builds a life worth leading. Thanks for watching.